You want to know the strangest thing about the day everything changed? It was boring. I keep telling people that and they never believe me. They expect alarms, red lights, some big dramatic speech off a balcony. But no. The morning the galaxy found out what we'd been doing, I was eating cold noodles out of a paper cup, half asleep, watching a status light blink green on a console I'd watched for 11 years. Green meant fine. Green always meant fine. My name doesn't matter much. Back then they called me Tier 3 Maintenance Doc Sublevel 9, which is a fancy way of saying I fix things nobody important ever looked at. Coolant lines, pressure seals, the little stuff that breaks when nobody's watching. I'd been doing it since I was 22. I was 33 the day it happened. So you can do the math on how much of my one life went into that hole in the ground. But let me back up, because if I just tell you about that morning, you won't understand why my hands were shaking so hard I couldn't hold the cup. So here's the thing nobody outside Earth knew. For about 90 years, the galaxy thought we were a joke. I don't say that bitterly. Not anymore, it's just true. When the Conquered, that's what the big alien governments called their little club, when the Conquered first made contact with us, they weren't impressed. We didn't have faster-than-light travel that worked right. Our ships rattled. You could hear them coming apart at the seams. Our colonies were these sad little tin cans clinging to dead rocks, leaking air, always one bad day from disaster. They ran their scanners over us, filed a report, and basically shrugged. There's a word they used for species like us, pre-relevant, means not worth talking to yet, means come back when you've grown up, child. And the worst part, they told us that to our faces, politely, with a little bow. My grandmother used to talk about it. She was alive when the first Conquered delegation landed. Said the alien ambassador, some tall, gray, careful-moving thing called a velid, stood in front of the whole United Assembly and explained, very gently, like you'd explain something to a kid who'd lost a game, that Earth would be placed under observational protection. Sounded nice, it wasn't. It meant we couldn't expand past certain borders, couldn't trade certain technology, couldn't sit at the big table where the real decisions got made. We could listen, we just couldn't speak. We were pets, basically, friendly pets, the kind you don't let off the leash because you're afraid they'll embarrass you. Grandma said the room was dead silent when he finished. You could hear the air handlers. Then somebody in the back, she never knew who, nobody ever found out, just started laughing. Not happy laughing. The other kind. The kind that comes up out of a person when they've just been insulted so completely there's nothing else to do with it. That laugh, she said, spread, slow at first, then the whole back of the room had it. She told me that was the most human sound she ever heard, and she lived a long time, heard a lot of sounds. Okay. So now you know how it started. Now I'll tell you the part the history files leave out, the part that still gives me chills. We agreed. That's right, the whole planet more or less agreed to be the joke, on purpose. There was this council session. I've read the transcripts, everybody has by now, they teach it to children, where the leaders of Earth got together after the Conquered delegation left. And instead of getting angry, instead of making threats they couldn't back up, this one old woman stood up. A logistics officer. Not even a politician. Nobody. Her name was Idris Khan, and she's on every wall now, every coin, but back then she was just the woman who knew where the cargo went. She said something like, and I'm doing this from memory, so forgive me, she said. They've told us exactly what they think we are, so let's be exactly that. Loudly. For as long as it takes. People didn't get it. You can hear it in the transcript, the confusion. Be the joke, on purpose, after they spat on us. But she kept going. She said, every camera they point at us, let them see a struggling species. Let them see rattling ships and failed launches and politicians screaming at each other. Let them see us drop things and break things and beg. Let them see weakness so convincing they stop watching close. And underneath, where they're not looking, we build. Build what? Somebody asked. You can hear him on the recording, tired, skeptical. She just smiled. The records say she answered with 2 words. A fleet. I think about that meeting more than is probably healthy. Because it's one thing to say a brave thing in a warm room with the doors closed. It's a whole other thing to do it for 90 years, without stopping, without telling anyone, without ever once getting to see the point of it. You have to understand what that actually means. It means generations of people keeping a secret bigger than their own lives. It means engineers who designed engines they knew they'd never see fly, they'd be dead before launch. And they did it anyway, perfectly, checking every number twice, for a day they'd never live to see. It means whole factories built under oceans, inside hollowed-out asteroids, behind fake mining operations that failed, right on schedule, so the conquered observers would write it down as one more human flop and move their attention somewhere else. We got good at failing. That's a strange sentence to say. We practiced it. There were people whose entire job was to make Earth look like it couldn't get out of its own way, crash a satellite here, botch a colony launch there, make sure the cameras caught it. We embarrassed ourselves with the precision of a surgeon. My great-uncle worked one of those fake mines. Out past the belt, this miserable gray rock. He spent 30 years pretending to dig for ore that wasn't there. Pretending the operation was failing year after year, sending home reports about bad yields and broken drills. While real cargo, engine cores, hull plating, things I still don't have names for, moved through tunnels 2 miles below him in the dark, where no scanner ever looked. He died out there, never told his own wife what he actually did. Couldn't. The secret didn't allow for it, so she buried him thinking he was a man who chased a worthless rock for 3 decades and come home with nothing. She thought he was a failure. He let her, because letting her think that was part of the job too. That's the cost nobody puts on the monuments. The fleet didn't just take steel and time and money. It took people's whole reputations. Their families looking at them across the dinner table like they'd thrown their lives in the trash. Children growing up a little ashamed of their parents. And they let it happen, quietly, sometimes smiling, because Idris Khanna was right, the only way to hide something that big is to make everyone watching feel a little bit sorry for you. You don't search the pockets of a man you pity. I should tell you what it was like living inside that. Day to day, I mean, because people imagine it was all noble and tense, everybody whispering in corners. It wasn't. It was mostly normal. That was the genius of it and the horror of it both. You'd get up. You'd go to work in a place that was secretly the most important place in human history. You'd fix a coolant line. You'd eat lunch next to someone who, it turned out, was running a war program. You'd complain about the food, because the food was bad, and the badness of the food was real and didn't care about destiny. And then you'd go home and watch the public broadcasts, the ones the conquered drones could see, and there'd be Earth on the screen being a mess, some colony riot, some failed launch, some politician saying something stupid. And you knew it was theater. You knew half of it was staged. And still, some nights, watching your own people play the fool for an audience of aliens who despised you, it got into you. It wore a groove. You'd start to half believe it yourself. Maybe we really are this. Maybe the real thing underground is the dream, and this sad little circus is the truth. That's the part that's hard to explain. Carrying a secret that big doesn't make you feel powerful. Mostly it makes you tired. And lonely in a specific way because there are people you love who you can never, ever tell. Sublevel 9 was part of all of it, of course. Took me 3 years working there to even figure that out. When I started, I genuinely thought I was just fixing coolant lines in an old defunct shipyard. That's what my paperwork said. Decommissioned. Heritage site. Preservation maintenance only. There was even a little plaque by the entrance about the historical importance of early human spaceflight. I used to dust it. I believed it completely. Why wouldn't I? I was 22. I needed a job. The job was quiet and the pay was steady and nobody bothered me. Then one night I'd stayed late, there was a coolant leak that wouldn't quit. I took a wrong turn looking for a shut-off valve. Went through a door I'd walked past 1,000 times and never opened. Figured it was a storage closet. The handle was stiff. I had to lean on it. It wasn't a closet. I came out onto a gantry, a long metal walkway hanging in the dark, and below me, going down further than my eyes could follow, was a ship. Not a ship like the ones we showed the cameras, not the rattling tin cans that fell apart on cue. This thing was God. I still don't have the words and I've had years to find them. Smooth, black, not black like paint, black like it was politely declining to be seen. It curved away into the dark below me like the back of some sleeping animal, something that breathed, and the curve just kept going, and I couldn't find the end of it. And there were people down there, hundreds, tiny as ants from where I stood, crawling all over it with lights and tools, working in this hushed, focused quiet, and I could just barely hear them, a low murmur of work rising up out of the dark. And here's the thing that broke my brain standing there. It was just one ship, in one dock, and I already knew, the way you know things in your gut before your head catches up, that there were docks like this everywhere, under every ocean, inside every dead-looking rock. I stood on that gantry, and I genuinely could not breathe. Because I understood all at once in one cold rush that everything I'd ever been told about my own species was a lie we were telling on purpose. The failures were the lie. This was the truth. This silent black thing in the dark, and the people loving it into existence. We weren't a joke. We never had been. We just had a really, really good sense of timing. A man came up behind me while I stood there. I didn't even hear him. Older guy. Grease worked so deep into his hands it had stopped being dirt and started being part of him. Foreman type. I don't know what I expected. An alarm. Guards. Somebody to grab me, drag me off, make me disappear for seeing what I'd seen. He didn't do any of that. He just walked up and stood next to me at the rail. Looked down at the ship the same way I was looking at it, like it never got old for him either. And he said, real quiet, "Took you long enough." I turned and stared at him. Turns out they'd been watching me for years, quietly deciding whether I was the kind of person who could carry something like this, whether I'd crack or sell it or just plain crumble. The wrong turn wasn't even an accident. They'd unlocked that stiff-handled door on purpose, the night they finally decided I was ready. The leak that kept me late, arranged, all of it. A test I didn't know I was taking, that I'd apparently been passing for years just by being a quiet, decent, unremarkable man who showed up and did his work, and didn't ask questions that weren't his to ask. That's how you got brought in. No oath, no paperwork, no ceremony, just a door left unlocked, and a tired man with grease in his hands saying "took you long enough," and your whole understanding of the universe rearranging itself on a metal walkway in the dark. His name was Bo. I should say that now because it matters later. The foreman's name was Bo. So that's who I became. One of maybe 400 million people, scattered across the whole solar system, who knew the truth and spent every single day pretending we didn't. You'd think a secret that big would crack. 400 million mouths, across 90 years. Somebody talks. Somebody gets drunk at a bad moment. Somebody gets angry at their government or greedy or scared and sells it to the conquered for a seat at the table. Nobody did. In 90 years, nobody did. I used to lie awake wondering why, and eventually I figured it out, and the answer is the most human thing I know. It wasn't fear that kept us quiet. The conquered couldn't have punished all of us. There were too many. And it wasn't really loyalty, not the flag-waving kind. It was that every single person carrying the secret had stood somewhere like that gantry once and felt that exact same punch in the chest. That cold rush. The moment you understood that we were so much more than they let us pretend to be. You don't sell a feeling like that. You couldn't. You'd sooner sell your own name, your own mother, the ground you stood on. It wasn't information to us. It was a kind of love, and nobody in 90 years found a price for it. I want to tell you about one more person before I get to that morning. Because she matters, and because I almost didn't notice her for 8 years, and that's the whole point of her. Petra. She ran the cargo logs 2 desks over from mine. Quiet woman. Wore the same gray cardigan most days, this soft, worn thing with a hole starting at one elbow. Brought soup in a thermos every single morning. I could set my clock by the little hiss of the lid coming off around 10. The kind of person you'd never look at twice. The kind of person whose furniture. Pleasant, forgettable furniture. For 8 years I thought Petra counted crates. We'd nod, talk about the weather we couldn't see being underground, complain about the food. Once she gave me half her sandwich when I forgot my lunch, and I thought, what a nice, ordinary woman. Hold on to her, the cardigan, the soup, the hole at the elbow. Because she's about to become the most important person you've never heard of. Now, the morning everything changed. Cold noodles, green light, I told you. The most boring morning of my life, right up until it wasn't. I was halfway through my shift, watching the same console I always watched, doing the same nothing I always did when the green light didn't go red exactly. It just changed. Started pulsing a color I had never once seen it make. A slow, deep amber, like a heartbeat, like something old waking up. I'd worked that station for 11 years. I knew every light it could make, every blink and flicker and warning. This was not one of them. This was a color that wasn't supposed to exist on that panel. I sat up so fast I knocked the noodles clean off the desk. Didn't even notice. Found them dried onto my boot hours later and didn't remember doing it. Then the speakers came on. Not the loud ones, not the alarm. The quiet speakers, the ones tucked up in the corners that I'd honestly never heard make a sound in 11 years. The ones reserved for messages from somewhere way up top. There was a click, a breath, and a voice I didn't recognize, calm and very clear, said 6 words. All hands, the watchers have moved. I need to explain what that meant, or the rest of this won't land the way it landed on us. For 90 years, the Concord had kept observation posts watching Earth. 3 big ones parked out past the moon, plus a scatter of little drones threaded through near space. They never hid them. That was the whole point. We were supposed to know we were being watched. It kept us honest. Kept the pet on its leash, aware of the hand holding it. And in 90 years, those posts had never moved. Not once. They sat in the exact same orbits year after year, decade after decade, like fence posts hammered into the dark. We knew them like you know the furniture in a room you grew up in. We built our entire hidden civilization around their blind spots. Every dock, every factory, every fake failing mine, all of it was tucked precisely into the gaps in their vision, slid between what they could see like a knife between ribs. We knew exactly where their eyes were. We'd known for 90 years. So the watchers have moved. That meant the fence posts had just been pulled up out of the ground, all at once. It meant something out there had spooked the Concord so badly, they'd broken a 90-year habit in a single morning. And if they were scared, the ones who held the leash, the ones who called us pre-relevant, then whatever was coming was very, very bad. The dock went strange after that. Not loud, strange. People came out of side rooms I didn't even know were occupied. Doors I'd assumed were storage opened, and out stepped folks I'd worked beside for years, and they were different. They stood up straighter. They moved with this sudden economy, no wasted motion, like they'd been wearing a heavy costume the whole time and had just shrugged it off, and you were finally seeing the body underneath. I watched a man I'd known as a janitor, a guy I'd shared an elevator with 100 times, who always seemed half asleep, walk past me with a tablet, reading off coordinates in a crisp voice, and I realized I had never once heard him really speak before. 11 years. I'd never heard his actual voice. That's when it started to sink in, the real depth of it. Even inside the secret, there were secrets. Even I, who thought I was on the inside, hadn't known who half the people around me really were. We were all wearing masks for each other, not just for the conquered. The whole place was layered like an onion, and I'd only ever seen the outer skin. And then Petra stood up. I watched her do it. She set down her thermos, the soup still in it. I remember the little curl of steam, and she rose from her desk, and she walked to the main console in the center of the room. And the way she walked was wrong. Or right. I don't know. It wasn't the walk of a woman who counts crates. It was the walk of someone the whole room turns to look at. And the whole room turned to look at her. She started giving orders. Fast, clear, certain. Routing instructions. Activation sequences. Names of systems I'd never heard, places I didn't know existed. People jumped to obey her like they'd been waiting their whole careers for her to finally speak. Petra wasn't a logistics clerk. Petra had never been a logistics clerk. Petra was a fleet coordinator, high up, maybe near the top of the whole structure, and she had spent 8 years sitting 3 meters from me, in a cardigan with a hole in the elbow, drinking soup and counting imaginary crates, holding inside her quiet gray self the authority to scramble a war fleet with a single sentence. 8 years. I'd given her half a thought a day, if that. She caught my eye for just a second in the middle of all of it, and she gave me this look not unkind, almost gentle, almost sad, like, "I'm sorry, friend. I'm sorry you had to find out who I really am like this on the worst morning. I'd have told you over soup if I could have." Then she turned back to the console and got to work saving every one of our lives. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The big screen came up. The one that had been broken the entire 11 years I worked there. There was a strip of tape over the corner of it that somebody had put there before I was even hired, a little label that said "out of service" in faded letters. Another lie, of course. The screen worked perfectly. They just never turned it on all that time because the day they turned it on would be the day everything was already happening. It lit up and it showed us outside. I'd never seen real space from out there. Never. I'd spent my entire adult life underground, fixing coolant lines under an ocean. So the first thing I felt, standing there with the worst news of the century about to break, the first thing I felt was just astonishment at how black it is. Films never get it right. It's not dark like night. Night has a softness, a blue to it, stars you can name. This was dark like nothing, like a hole punched in everything, like the absence of the idea of light. It went on forever and it did not care about us even slightly. And in that nothing, coming in slow from the deep, was a shape. Not a conquered shape. I knew all of theirs from the training files, smooth, proud, symmetrical ships designed by people who'd never been afraid. This was something else entirely. It was jagged, wrong-angled. It looked less built than accumulated, like things had been welded onto it over a very long time by something that didn't care how it looked, only how it ate. And it moved in little jerks. Forward pause, like it was tasting the space ahead of it. Sampling, deciding. Somebody behind me whispered a word I didn't know. A short, ugly word that stuck in the air. And Petra, without even turning from her console, said it again. Louder, clear enough that all of us would hear it and there'd be no mistake. Reavers. Here's the thing about Reavers. We weren't supposed to know they existed. The conquered never told us about them. Why would you tell your pet about the wolves? We found out the way we found out most things over those 90 years. By being underestimated in a room and listening very carefully while the people around us assumed we were too stupid to follow along. Reavers weren't a government. They weren't a species, even not really, not anymore. They were what happened out at the ragged edge of the galaxy where the conquered's laws ran thin and then ran out. Scavenger fleets. Stripped down, hollowed out things, machines, and the husks of 100 conquered peoples grafted together into one hunger. They didn't conquer worlds, that word's too clean, they ate them. Came down on a planet and stripped it. Metal, water, biomass, people, all of it the same to them, all just raw material. And when there was nothing left, they moved on to the next one and left a dead rock spinning behind them, a clean-picked bone in the dark. And here is the part that turned my blood to ice water, standing in that dock with the cold noodles on my boot. The conquered couldn't stop them. That's why the Watchers had moved. That's why the fence posts pulled up in a single morning after 90 years. A Reaver swarm was sweeping through this arm of the galaxy, a big one. And the great and mighty conquered, the ones who'd called us pre-relevant, who'd put us on the leash, who'd appointed themselves our protectors with that little bow, they took one look at it coming and they ran, pulled their forces back to defend their own core worlds, cut their losses out here on the edge. And Earth, little leashed Earth, the joke, the pet Earth was right in the swarm's path. They left us. The protectors who'd spent 90 years insisting we couldn't protect ourselves, who'd built their whole relationship with us on the idea that we were helpless children. The moment something truly dangerous appeared, they didn't even send a warning. They didn't evacuate anyone. They just quietly packed up their 3 big eyes and their scatter of drones, and they pulled back, and somewhere in their calculations, Earth was a convenient little speed bump, a snack for the swarm, something to slow it down a day or two and buy the important world some time. That's what we were to them, when it finally actually mattered, a speed bump. I want you to sit in that for a second, the way we had to. 90 years of being told we were weak. 90 years of swallowing it, smiling, dropping things on purpose, burying our grey-tunkles under the weight of fake failure. 90 years of playing the fool, and the very first time something with real teeth came over the horizon, the people who'd cast themselves as our betters didn't lift a finger. They wrote us off, penciled us in as the appetizer. I looked around that dock. I looked at Petra in her cardigan with the hole in the elbow, calm as still water, routing a war. I looked at Bo, the foreman, grease in his hands, who'd brought me into all this with 3 quiet words. I looked at the janitor who turned out to have a crisp voice, and the side room people who'd shrugged off their costumes, and all these ordinary, tired, underground human beings who'd given up their reputations and their families' good opinion of them to keep a secret nobody had ever thanked them for. Who'd held this love in the dark for 90 years. And I watched the anger move through that room, but it wasn't loud anger. That's the thing I will never ever forget. Nobody shouted. Nobody slammed a fist. Nobody panicked or wept or froze. They just started getting ready. Quietly, methodically, with this terrible, beautiful calm. The way you move when you've been getting ready for 90 years, and the moment you always knew was coming has finally arrived, and there's nothing left to feel except relief that the waiting is over. Petra turned around, looked at all of us. The whole room went still for her. And she said the thing I think about every single day of my life since that morning. The thing I'll be thinking about when I die. She said, they think we're going to die scared. She let it sit, looked around the room person to person slow. They left us here because they think we'll panic. They think we'll spend our last day the way they imagine us, flailing, weeping, begging the sky for help that isn't coming. A small breath. They've watched us for 90 years and they still don't know us at all. Then quieter. We're not going to die scared. We're not going to die at all. But understand me, even if we were, we would not be scared. We've had 90 years to be scared. We used it all up. We're fresh out. Somebody laughed. That same laugh. The one my grandmother heard in the assembly all those years ago, in the dead silence after the alien with the careful movements told us what we were. The human one. The one that isn't really about anything being funny at all. And then the floor started to move. Not shake, move. The whole dock, this thing I'd believed was a fixed, solid building for 11 years, a place with a heritage plaque. The whole dock began to open. Walls I had leaned my tired back against 1,000 times split along seams I'd never seen and slid apart, smooth and enormous and silent, and light came pouring up from below, white and blue and endless, and the sound. God, the sound. A deep, rising hum, felt in the chest before the ears. Hundreds of engines I had never once heard, all through the planet and the moon and the belt and the cold, quiet places we'd hidden them, waking up at the same moment. 90 years of held breath, all of it letting go at once. You didn't hear it so much as you became it for a second. I dropped what I was holding. I think everyone did. I ran to the gantry, the one where I'd first seen the ship all those years ago, the night Bo found me. My legs took me there without asking. I had to see it. And I looked down. It wasn't sleeping anymore. Lights were running along its hull now, blue and white, racing the length of that impossible black curve like blood coming back into a cold hand, like feeling returning to something that had been numb for 90 years. People were peeling away the last of the scaffolding, throwing it clear. And the ship, the black, silent, sleeping animal that had terrified a 25-year-old me into forgetting how to breathe, the ship was lifting. Actually lifting. Rising off its cradle, slow and so impossibly quiet for something that size, the way a whale leaves the bottom of the sea without seeming to try. Rising toward an opening high above that I hadn't even known was a door, a great iris in the world peeling back to show a circle of that black, black sky. And it was just one. I keep saying that, I know I keep saying it, but it's the part that takes the top of my head off every time, even now. It was just one, and when I looked up through that opening, up into the sky we'd hidden beneath for 90 years, I saw the others. Hundreds, and then it wasn't hundreds. Coming up out of the oceans, breaking the surface in towers of white water and falling spray. Coming up out of the deserts, shedding sand like skin. Coming up off the dark side of the moon and out of the bellies of asteroids that the conquered had scanned 1,000 times across 90 years and dismissed, every time as empty rock. Rising, all of them, everywhere. The sky filling up with them until there was more ship than sky. A fleet so vast that the historians still argue about the true number, because no single human being ever saw all of it at once. It was too big to fit inside one pair of eyes. You only ever got your piece of it, your slice of the sky, and you had to take it on faith that it went on like that over every horizon. And it did. The most powerful fleet that arm of the galaxy had ever seen, or would see for a long time after. Built in silence. Built in shame on purpose as a costume. Built by people who let their own children think they were failures. By men who died in fake mines without ever telling their wives the truth, by a woman in a gray cardigan with a hole in the elbow, by a foreman with grease for hands. And the galaxy had slept through every bit of it, for 90 years, right up until this exact morning. I stood on that gantry with tears running down my face, and I'm not embarrassed to say it now. I was not the only one. Half that dock was crying and not one of us was ashamed. And I watched the lie of my entire life finally, at long last, stand up and tell the truth. Behind me, Petra was already coordinating intercepts, calm as soup steam, voice never rising. Out there, the Reaver swarm still didn't know. It was still coming in those slow, ugly, tasting jerks. Forward, pause, still absolutely certain it was about to crack open one more defenseless little rock, and strip it clean and move on without a second thought. It had no idea, none at all, no idea what was rising up out of the dark to meet it. I almost felt something for it in that second, almost. Bo came and stood next to me again at the rail. Same as that first night, all those years ago. Grease on his hands even now. I think it was just part of him by then. I think he'd have had grease on his hands at his own funeral. He looked down at the empty cradle where our ship had been. Then he looked up, through the great iris in the world, at the sky we'd kept hidden for 90 years, now full of fire and rising steel. And he said it again. Quiet, almost to himself. But this time he wasn't talking to me, and we both knew it. This time he was talking past the gantry and past the dock and past the sky, out to the swarm, and the concord that ran, and every careful gray ambassador who'd ever bowed politely and called us a pet. He was talking to the whole sleeping galaxy as it finally began to wake. Took you long enough. Let that land for a second. 90 years. Engine cores designed by people who died before they were ever switched on. Hull plating tested against simulations, against math, against the best guesses of 100 generations of engineers working in the dark, but never against a reaver, never against anything. You can't field test a secret. The whole point was that nobody ever saw it move. So the most powerful fleet the galaxy had ever seen went up into the black that morning, carrying the truth that no human soul knew for certain whether a single weapon on a single ship would fire. We had faith, we had math, we had 90 years of careful, loving work. We did not have proof. And the swarm coming in did not deal in faith. I want to back up just a little because I left something out, and it matters now. When the floor opened and our ship lifted off its cradle, I told you I ran to the gantry. I told you about the lights coming up the hull like blood, returning to a cold hand. What I didn't tell you is that there were people on it. I'd somehow thought, I don't know what I thought, that the ships flew themselves maybe, that something this far beyond me must not need anything as small as a person inside it. But as the ship rose past the gantry, slow and close enough that I could have reached out and touched the cold black skin of it, I saw the windows. And there were faces in them. People I half knew, people from the dock, the janitor with the crisp voice, a young woman who used to run spare parts up from sublevel 11, couldn't have been more than 20. An old man I'd seen 100 times in the canteen line, who always took the last of the bad coffee so somebody else wouldn't have to. They weren't strangers, that was the gut punch. The most powerful fleet ever built was crewed by the people I ate lunch next to, the forgettable ones, the furniture. They were going out to meet the thing that ate worlds, and most of them had names I'd never bothered to learn. The girl from sublevel 11. I have to tell you about her because I'll never forgive myself otherwise. Her name was Tace. I only learned it later, wrong order like everything that day. For 2 years she'd brought parts up to my station, set them down, said, "Here you go," and left. 2 years. And I'd never once asked her name, because she was just the parts girl and I was tired, and the secret made you tired in a way that ate your manners. As her ship rose past the gantry, she saw me. I don't know how through that black glass, but she did. And she lifted one hand. Not a wave exactly. More like acknowledgement. Like, I see you and you see me and we both know what this is. I lifted mine back. It was all I had. It was nothing. It was the only thing I'll ever be sure I did right that day. Then the ship climbed past, and she was gone up into the iris of black sky, and I never saw her face again outside of a recording. Remember her, Tace, the parts girl. We'll come back to her, and I wish to God we wouldn't have to. So the black, the swarm, the fleet rising to meet it. The big screen, the one that had said out of service for 11 years, showed all of it now. And the dock had gone quiet, not the working quiet from before, a held quiet. 400 people watching a screen and not breathing, because down in our stomachs we all knew the same secret nobody would say out loud. We don't know if it works. Petra stood at the center console, perfectly calm, and I understood for the first time what that calm cost her. Because Petra knew better than any of us. Petra had the numbers. Petra was the one person in that room who could see exactly how thin the line was between the most powerful fleet ever built and 400 million people about to watch their whole secret die in the dark in front of them. And she stood there in her cardigan with the hole in the elbow and gave nothing away. Not a flicker. She held all of our fear for us so we wouldn't have to carry it ourselves. I didn't understand leadership until that morning. I thought it was about giving orders. It's not. It's about being the one who's allowed to be afraid last. On the screen, the lead ships of our fleet crossed some invisible line. And the swarm finally saw them. You could tell the exact moment. The reavers had been coming in those slow, ugly, tasting jerks. Forward, pause, confident, lazy, certain they were about to crack open another defenseless rock. And then, all at once, the whole jagged front of the swarm just stopped. Forward, pause. It held there in the black, and I swear you could feel it thinking, recalculating. This thing that had eaten 1,000 worlds, that had never in its long, ugly existence met anything it couldn't strip, looking up and seeing a wall of ships rising out of a planet it had filed under helpless. Somebody in the dock laughed, soft, couldn't help it. Because for 90 years we'd been the ones recalculating. We'd been the ones swallowing it, playing small, telling ourselves maybe we really are this. And now, for one perfect second, the monster at the edge of the galaxy got to feel exactly what that was like. The pause, the cold realization. Oh, I have misjudged this. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then the swarm came apart into 1,000 pieces and threw itself at us, and the screaming started. I don't mean people screaming, not at first. I mean the ships, the reaver ships. When they attacked, they made a sound. I know that's impossible. There's no sound in the black, but the sensors translated it for us, gave it a voice so we could understand what we were looking at, and what they chose to translate it as was a scream. A high, layered, grinding wail, 1,000 throats that weren't throats. The voice of the thing that ate worlds finally announcing itself. And the swarm hit our front line like a wave hits a cliff. The first ship we lost was called the HFY. Of course it was. Of course they'd named one after her, the old logistics woman who stood up in that council session 90 years ago and said, "Let's be the joke." Of course she was in the front. It went up on the screen in a flash of white that hurt to look at. 1 second a ship, smooth, black, full of people I might have eaten lunch beside, and the next a expanding ring of light, and then nothing. Just the black, closing back over the space where it had been like water over a dropped stone. The dock made a sound, all 400 of us at once, not a scream. Worse, a kind of low collective groan, the sound a body makes when it's hit somewhere it can't protect. And I thought we all thought, I saw it on every face, it doesn't work. 90 years. It doesn't work, and we're going to watch all of them die, and then it'll be our turn, and we were a joke after all. Petra didn't move. She watched the HFY die, and her jaw tightened by maybe a millimeter. And then she said, very quietly to the room, to herself, to the dead, "Wait. Here's the thing we didn't understand, watching from the dock. The thing the math knew that our scared animal hearts didn't. The HFY wasn't a failure. It was a fist. Our ships weren't built to trade blows in a line, the way the conquered fought, all that proud symmetry. We didn't have 90 years of practice fighting. We had 90 years of practice hiding, and you learn different things in the dark than you learn in the open. You learn patience. You learn to let the other thing commit. You learn to take a hit on purpose, to make the enemy think they've found your weakness, and to close the trap while they're still congratulating themselves. The HFY went into the densest part of the swarm and let itself be swarmed, drew them in, packed them tight around it, all those jagged, hungry things crowding in to feed. And then it didn't just explode. It did something to the black that I don't have the physics for, and the recording still won't fully explain. The white flash wasn't the ship dying. The white flash was the ship spending itself, all at once, on purpose, and taking a quarter of the swarm with it into whatever's on the other side of that light. A quarter of the swarm, gone, in the space where we thought we just watched our first ship die helpless. It wasn't a death. It was the first word of a sentence we'd been 90 years learning to speak. And the swarm, for the second time in 3 minutes, paused. The doc figured it out about a heartbeat after the swarm did. That low groan we'd all made, it turned into something else. I don't even have a word for the sound 400 people make when grief flips inside out into ferocious, disbelieving hope. It started low and it climbed, and by the end it was almost that laugh again, the human one, but bigger, the whole room of us. Because we understood all at once what we were watching. It works. It works. The math was right. The dead engineers were right. The men in the fake mines were right. Idris Kano, standing up in a silent council room 90 years ago, was right. It works, and the thing that ate 1,000 worlds just lost a quarter of itself to one ship full of people we ate lunch with. And it is only now, only this second, beginning to understand what it picked a fight with. Petra closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. I watched her do it. The only crack she allowed herself all day. Then she opened them and got back to the work of winning. What came next is hard to narrate because it happened everywhere at once and no one person saw it all. I can only give you my slice, my piece of the sky. Our fleet stopped rising and started moving, and it moved like nothing the swarm had ever faced. Not a line, not a wall. Something more like a flock of birds, or a school of fish. Thousands of ships turning together as if they shared one mind, folding around the swarm, closing in from angles that shouldn't have been possible. That was the other thing 90 years in the dark taught us. We'd had nothing to do but practice. No real enemy, no real battles, so we practiced together, over and over, generation after generation, until moving as one stopped being a skill and became a kind of instinct passed down like a family recipe. The conquered had armies. We had something closer to a single enormous animal made of people, and it had been rehearsing this one dance its whole life. The swarm fought back. God, it fought. It was old and it was vast and it did not want to die. We lost ships. I won't pretend we didn't. Every few seconds another white flash, another ring of light closing over another crew of people somebody loved. But for the first time in the history of that monster, the math was running the other way. For the first time, the thing that ate worlds was the one being eaten. And then I saw Tace's ship. I didn't know it was hers at first. There were thousands. But the screen tracked the front line, and one ship had pushed out ahead of the others, too far ahead, alone, driving straight into a knot of reavers that had broken through and turned back toward Earth. Toward us. Toward the dock, the oceans, the cities full of people who still didn't know any of this was happening. That knot of reavers had found the gap. They were going to make it to the planet. And there was exactly one ship between them, and 400 million people who'd never see it coming. Petra's voice cut across the dock, the only time all day it wasn't perfectly calm. Who is that? Pull them back, they're alone, pull them. And a voice came back over the speakers, young, clear, a little out of breath. Negative, I've got the angle. You won't make it in time, I will. It was Tace. The parts girl, 20 years old, here you go, 2 years and I never asked her name. I want to tell you she came back. I want that so badly that even now, telling it, part of me is reaching for the version where she comes back. She didn't come back. She did exactly what the Idris Kano did, what she'd been raised her whole short life to do if it ever came to it. She drove that ship into the heart of the knot, into the densest part, let them swarm her, let them think they had her. And she spent herself, all at once, on purpose for us. The flash lit up the whole dock, whited out the screen, and when it cleared, the knot of reavers that had been seconds from the planet was just gone. The path to Earth was clean. The cities went on not knowing. 400 million people kept living their ordinary morning, and not one of them ever knew that a girl who'd brought me spare parts for 2 years had stood between them and the end of everything, alone and chosen it, and not flinched. The dock was silent. And then, very quietly, Petra said the only eulogy any of them would get that day. She said, Marker. Somebody at a console pressed something, and on the big tactical display where Tace's ship had been, a single point of light began to pulse. Steady. Amber. The same slow amber as the light on my console that morning, the one I'd never seen before, the color of something old waking up. It pulsed there for the rest of the battle, and then there were others. As we lost more ships, more lights. The display filling slowly with steady amber points, each one a crew, each one people somebody ate lunch beside, each one marked so they wouldn't be forgotten in the noise of winning. By the end, the display looked like a second sky, a sky of our own dead laid over the dark. I had to look away from it. I'm not proud of that. I looked away from Tace's light, and I looked at Bo. The foreman, grease on his hands. He was standing at the rail still, the way he'd stood that first night years ago, the way he'd stood an hour before when the fleet rose. But he wasn't saying took you long enough anymore. He wasn't saying anything. He was watching the amber lights fill the display, and his face was doing something I'd never seen it do. Bo, who'd carried this secret longer than I'd been alive. Bo, who'd brought me in with 3 dry words and never once seemed shaken by anything. He was crying, silent, not wiping it away, just letting it run down into the grease-gray stubble on his jaw and stand there. And he caught me looking, and he didn't look embarrassed, and he said the truest thing anybody said all day. He said, "This is what it costs. This is what we built, both things. People forget the second one when they look at the ships." He nodded at the amber sky on the display. "Don't you forget it, you hear me? Don't you ever let them tell this story without that part." I haven't. That's why I'm telling it to you with that part in it. The battle turned. I'll tell you the shape of how it ended in the next part, because the ending deserves its own room, and I'm not going to rush it the way the conquered rushed away from us. But I'll tell you the moment I knew we'd won, because it wasn't a weapon, it wasn't a flash. It was the swarm trying to run. That old, vast, world-eating thing, the monster the mighty conquered fled rather than face. At some point it stopped attacking and tried to leave. Tried to peel itself off Earth and limp back out into the deep dark, where the strong things hide from the stronger. And our fleet didn't let it. Not out of cruelty, out of arithmetic. You don't let a thing like that crawl off to heal and come back for the next world over, the next people, the next species too small to defend themselves. We'd been the small thing too long ourselves to wish that on anyone. So the most powerful fleet ever built closed the door. Gently, almost. Inevitably. The way the floor of that dock had opened, the same patient certainty, only in reverse, folding shut around the swarm until there was nowhere left for it to go. The screaming on the sensors got higher, then thinner, then ship by ship, light by light it stopped. When it was over, the dock didn't cheer. I think people expect that too. The big victory, the roar, the people hugging. There was some of that later in the cities when they finally found out, but that's a different story and they weren't there for the cost, so their joy was a cleaner, lighter thing than ours. In the dock, when the last reaver light went out and the black went still, and the threat to 400 million people was simply over. We were quiet. 400 of us, looking at a display that was half the enemy's dark and half our own amber dead. And the quiet wasn't grief exactly, and it wasn't relief exactly. It was both, braided so tight you couldn't pull them apart. It was the quiet of people who'd waited 90 years to stop being a joke, and had finally done it, and had finally counted the price, and were learning in real time that the two things weigh exactly the same. Petra finally stepped back from the console. She'd been standing at it for hours. She looked, for the first time all day, like a tired woman in a cardigan with a hole in the elbow. She looked at the amber sky of our dead. She looked at all of us. And she didn't make a speech. She'd used her one speech that morning before the rising, when she told us we were fresh out of fear. She just said, "Go home. Hold the people you can still hold." I went up out of sub-level 9 for the first time in I don't know how long. up through levels I'd never seen, up toward a surface I'd spent 11 years working beneath and barely remembered. And I want to tell you what was waiting up there. The sky, and what we'd done to it, and the thing the Conquered did next when they came creeping back to a galaxy that had changed while they were running. But that's part 3, and Bo's right, you don't tell this story without the cost in it. So before I tell you how it ended, I needed you to know their names. Tace, the Idris Kano, the Amber Sky. The most powerful fleet ever built worked. It just turned out worked and cost were the same word all along. There were maybe a dozen of us packed in. People from the dock. We just watched our fleet eat the thing that ate worlds. We just watched a quarter of our friends turn into amber lights on a display. And in the elevator going up, nobody said a word about any of it. A man near the back said his daughter had a recital that afternoon. Said it real quiet, almost to himself. She's doing a piece on the violin. She's been practicing for weeks. And somebody else said, what time? And he said 4 o'clock. And she said, you'll make it. It's only just past noon. And that was it. That was the whole conversation. Noon. We'd saved the world before lunch, and a man was worried about getting to his kid's recital. And the worst part, the part that got me, was that he was right to be. The cities didn't know. The recital was still happening. The world we just bled to save had spent the whole morning practicing violin, completely unaware, and was going to go right on doing it. That's what we'd protected. Not a flag, not a destiny. A 4 o'clock recital that the kid would never know was nearly canceled by the end of everything. I think that's when it got real for me. Not the fleet, not the battle, the recital. The doors opened onto the surface, and I stepped out into open air for the first time in I don't know how long, and I looked up, and the sky was full of them. Coming home. Our fleet, what was left of it, descending back toward the oceans and the deserts and the dark side of the moon, back toward the hidden cradles. But slower now, heavier. Some of them trailing damage, scarred black where they'd been hit, limping the way you limp when you've won, but it took everything. And the cities had finally noticed. Because you can hide a fleet under the ocean for 90 years. You cannot hide it coming back down out of the sky in daylight. The streets were full of people, standing still, heads tipped back, traffic stopped in the roads, doors hanging open, a whole planet of people who'd been told their entire lives that they were a struggling little world clinging to dead rocks, looking up and watching the truth come home. Nobody was cheering, not yet, they didn't understand yet. They just stood there, hundreds of millions of them across every city on Earth, watching enormous black ships they'd never seen before descend out of a sky that had no business holding them, and you could feel the question rising off the whole planet at once. What is this? What is this? What have we been? What were we the whole time and nobody told us? I stood there in the crowd, one more face in it, and I knew the answer, and I couldn't say it, and for the first time in 11 years the not saying didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a gift I got to hold for one more minute before the whole world got to open it. Then a ship came down low over the city, close, scarred, one of the limping ones. And as it passed over us, slow, this low and broken and triumphant thing, somebody in the crowd I never saw who, I never do. It's always somebody you never see, somebody started to laugh. That laugh. The one my grandmother heard in the assembly 90 years ago, in the silence after the careful gray ambassador told us what we were. The human one. The one that isn't about anything being funny. And it spread. The way it spread in the assembly. Slow at first, then faster, then the whole street had it, then, I swear I could feel it, even if I couldn't hear it, the whole planet had it. 90 years of swallowed laughter coming up all at once. A sound a species makes exactly once in its history. The sound of finally getting to stop pretending. The kid with the violin recital probably heard it through a window and didn't know what it was. She'll know now, she's grown now. Everybody knows now. It took days for the full truth to come out to the public. You can't just tell 400 million people the other 400 million were lying to you for 90 years. You have to do it carefully, kindly. We'd had practice at carefully. We were good at carefully. And the reaction wasn't what you'd think. There was anger, sure. There were people who felt betrayed, who learned that their grandfather, who they'd buried thinking he was a failure, had actually died building the thing that just saved the species, and couldn't decide whether to be proud or furious that they'd never gotten to know. But mostly, and this is the part about us that I love most, the part I most want you to understand, mostly people understood. Almost instantly. Because every single human being who heard the truth had the same thought, and it was the thought that had kept 400 million mouths shut for 90 years. Of course we did. Of course we were more than they let us pretend. We always knew somewhere, we just didn't have the word for it. The fleet didn't surprise us in the end. It only confirmed something every human being had been quietly carrying their whole lives, under the jokes, under the leash. That we were never the small thing they said we were. We were just patient. Now I have to tell you about the conquered coming back. Because they did come back. Of course they did. Once the swarm was dead and the danger was past, the great and mighty conquered came creeping back toward our arm of the galaxy to survey the damage, to count which worlds had been lost, to start the slow, careful work of pretending they hadn't run. And they expected to find Earth the way they left it. A dead rock, a clean-picked bone, a speed bump that had done its job and slowed the swarm and been consumed. They expected to find us gone. I wasn't in the room for what happened next. Almost nobody was. But the recording is public now. They teach it to children, the way they teach Idris Kano's council session, the two bookends of our whole story 90 years apart. The conquered delegation arrived expecting a graveyard, and instead they found a planet, whole, alive. Lights on, recitals happening, and parked between them and that planet in calm and perfect order, ship after ship after ship of a fleet that should not have existed, that their scanners had been gliding over for 90 years and writing off as empty rock. The same careful gray species sent an ambassador, maybe even a descendant of the first one, I don't know, they all move the same. He came aboard the lead human ship to deliver some prepared statement about observational protection and resuming the previous arrangement and Earth's status as a pre-relevant species under Concord. And the human who met him didn't let him finish. It was Petra. Of course it was Petra. Cardigan and all, she wore the cardigan, I'm told, on purpose, the one with the hole in the elbow. She wore it to meet the galaxy. And the ambassador started in with his careful words, the bow, the politeness, the gentle voice you use with a child or a pet, and Petra let him get a sentence or two in. Let him commit to it. Old habit. 90 years of letting the other thing commit before you close the trap. And then she held up one hand. The way Tace held up one hand going past the gantry. The way you say I see you and you see me, and we both know what this is. And she said, it's the most quoted thing any human has ever said. You've probably heard it, but you have to hear it knowing where it came from. Knowing about the soup and the hole in the elbow and the 8 years 3 meters from my desk, she said. You called us pre-relevant. We spent 90 years agreeing with you. We were very polite about it. She let that sit, the way she always let things sit. You're welcome, by the way, for the swarm. We know you can't say it, so we'll say it for you. A small breath. Now, we'd like to sit at the table, not because you're finally letting us, because there's no longer anyone in this arm of the galaxy who can stop us, including you, especially you. And then this is the part that gets me. This is the part that's us, she said. And we're not going to do to you what you did to us. We're not going to leash you. We're not going to call you names. We're not going to leave you to be eaten when the next bad thing comes out of the dark. She looked at him, that gray, careful creature who'd run while we stayed. We're better than that. We had 90 years to decide who we'd be when this day came, and that's who we decided to be. So sit down. There's room. There was always room. You just never offered us a chair. The ambassador sat down. The recording ends there. They cut it before whatever came next, the negotiations, the boring real work of a species taking its place. They cut it on the ambassador sitting down, because that's the moment. That's the whole 90 years, right there, ending with the careful gray thing that called us a pet pulling out a chair because a tired woman in a cardigan told it to. I want to come back to the cost now. Because Bo made me promise, and because you've come this far with me, and because a story that ends on Petra's victory and stops there isn't the true story. It's just the part that's easy to cheer for. The amber sky on that display, the lights, the dead, we counted them. Everyone. It took weeks. Every crew, every ship, every name, and we didn't just count them. We learned them. That was the rule after the thing the whole planet agreed on without anyone having to say it. Nobody who spent themselves in that dark would be a number. Everyone would be a name. Tace got a name. The part's girl. Here you go. They put her name on the wall in sublevel 11 where she used to run spares up from, and they put it on a ship, a new one of the ones we've built since. Out in the open now, no more hiding, and that ship is one of the ones that goes out to the small worlds. The pre-relevant ones. The ones the conquered would have left to be eaten. It goes out to them. The ship named for the girl who never got asked her name, and it stands between them and the dark. I think she'd have liked that. I think Here You Go is exactly what that ship is for. Bo didn't live to see all of it. I should tell you that because it's true, and because he'd want it in here, the cost being the cost. He was old when it happened, older than I'd realized. The grease in his hands had been there 50 years. He saw the fleet rise. He saw the swarm die. He saw the conquered sit down. He got that much. He got to be right, after a whole life of being told he was a failure, of brining people quietly in through unlocked doors and watching their faces change on the gantry. But the years after, the new galaxy, the open sky, he didn't get those. He went quiet the way the old ones do, a season or two after the day everything changed. And at the end he wasn't talking about the fleet. He was talking about the people. He always did at the end. He'd say their names. The ones from the fake mines, the ones from the front line. Tace. The last thing he ever said to me, I was sitting with him. It was late. He looked at me with those tired eyes and he said, "Don't let them tell it clean." And I said I wouldn't. And here I am, not telling it clean, keeping the promise. So that's the story. The whole of it, my slice of it, the piece of the sky I got to see. The galaxy slept and we built. For 90 years, in the dark, in shame we put on like a costume, in fake mines and hidden docks, by people who let their own children think they'd wasted their lives. We built the most powerful fleet that arm of the galaxy had ever seen. And the day it finally mattered, it worked. It saved a planet that never knew it was in danger. It saved a recital at 4 o'clock. It cost us an amber sky full of names we're still saying. And then, with all that power in our hands, enough power that no one could have stopped us doing anything we wanted, we did the one thing they never expected. We pulled out a chair. People ask me sometimes, the young ones, the ones born into the open sky who never had to hide, they ask me what the lesson is, what it all meant. They want me to put a bow on it. And I always think of the elevator, the man and the recital, 4 o'clock. The lesson isn't that we were strong. Everybody's strong, given 90 years and a good enough reason. The lesson isn't even that we were patient, though God knows we were. The lesson is what we built it for. We didn't build the most powerful fleet ever to conquer. We didn't build it for revenge, even though revenge was right there, easy, deserved. We built it so a kid could play violin at 4 o'clock and never know how close it came. We built it so the next small world, the next pre-relevant joke at the edge of the dark, would have somebody between them and the wolves. We built the most powerful fleet ever seen, and we used it to be gentle, on purpose. Because we'd had 90 years to decide who we'd be, and that's who we decided to be. That's the part I need you to carry, not the ships. Bo was right. People always remember the ships and forget the rest. Remember the rest. The galaxy doesn't sleep anymore. It's awake now, all of it, busy and loud and full of 1,000 people's learning to share a table that finally has enough chairs. And every so often, on a quiet night, I go up to the surface. I can now, anytime I want. There's no secret left to keep. And I look up at the sky that we used to hide under. And it's full of lights. Some of them are stars, some of them are ours. And I can't always tell the difference anymore. And I've decided that's exactly right. Took us long enough. But we got here.